Welcome to the Dr. Love Show, providing inspirational food that will feed your soul. Each week, we deliver the best tips, news, and information that will lead you to win both personally and professionally. Now, here's your host, Dr. Love.
Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Love Show. Today's show is going to be epic as we talk about a subject matter that is near and dear to the fabric of our society. And we're talking about mass incarceration. Mass incarceration impacts many communities, but more specifically, it impacts Black and Brown communities. Today on this show, we're going to raise the level of awareness about how impactful it is in our city government, how impactful it is for our families, how impactful it is to our neighboring communities, because we believe that as we give voice to this issue, that we can change mindset. And mindset becomes how we be able to move policy and government and how we can strategically unify to move this issue of mass incarceration. Today on the show, we have a CNN Hero Awardee who is definitely going to share his story. His story is like none other. However, it's a story that will be told throughout time. And so here, everybody, I want you to help me welcome our person that we admire for his work, for his fortitude, and that is none other than my brother, Richard Miles.
How you doing? How you doing?
I am doing wonderful, man. How about you?
Man, I'm blessed and won't complain.
I know that's right, man. Hey, so you was telling me that you're a new father, man. How was that going?
It's going good. So my wife and I have a 4-year-old daughter. Her name is Raylan. And the latter part of 2019, we decided, I guess, to enlarge in our territories. And
definitely so hot. Definitely enlarge the territory, man.
Yes. And so December 1st, my second daughter was born, and her name is Aubrey Joy Miles. And so it's just an awesome way, I guess, to kick in the new year with a new face in the house. And so it's exciting. A lot less sleep, but it's exciting.
I definitely understand that, man. And I know it's definitely exciting when you have a new baby, man. And just to be able to enjoy your child and your family and fatherhood, man, I know that God is truly blessing you in that area.
Yes, sir.
As we look at mass incarceration, and I've heard your story, man, numerous of times, and it's definitely a story worth hearing. It projects so much to community. It projects so much to life. Can you just tell the audience of the Dr. Love Show kind of your story, and then just kind of tell us how you move forward from your story?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, I mean, once again, thank you for this platform and this opportunity to talk about, I refer to it as the journey of miles of freedom. So I'm 44 years old right now. And when I was 19, very young man, I graduated from high school, was still working at McDonald's. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and still working at McDonald's. And I told my mom and dad that I wanted to move out. I was getting ready to go to TSTC college in Waco to do plastics engineering. And so I felt like my life was kind of pretty much structured for me.
Yes.
One night, May 15th, 1994, I decided to go over my girlfriend's house that stayed in Robin Oaks Apartments. We stayed over there pretty much all day, and the buses stopped running around 1 o'clock. And one of my friends, Ernest, his mom stays in the apartments, and she was over there, and he was headed to his girlfriend's house that stayed right around the corner from me in North Dallas by Love Field Airport.
Right.
So I asked him, I say, hey, man, Ernest, man, I need to get to the house. I'll pay you $5 to take me. And he said, cool. So we left. Ernest has a blue Cutlass, and that's important. So we left in a blue Cutlass from Oak Cliff, headed to North Dallas. We made one stop at a 7-Eleven on the corner of Inwood, and then proceeded to the corner of University and Roper. And that's where his girlfriend stayed. She stayed right there. And I stayed on the corner of Cresthaven and Bluffview, which is probably about 10-minute walk at max,
Right.
And so I get out of the car, I pay Ernest the $5, and I'm a 19-year-old young man walking home. It's probably about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. I remember walking in front of the Sewell Cadillac shops, and Lemon Avenue veers off into Bluff View. And so on the corner of Bluff View and Lemon, there's a Red Coleman liquor store.
Hmm.
And I went to the Red Coleman to call my friend James to ask him to unlock the door to the house. And he picked up the phone, told him, he hung up the phone. And as I crossed the street, I noticed a police car that was sitting idle on the corner of Bluffview and Lover's Lane. Didn't
Right.
think nothing of it, walked by the car, and the next thing I noticed was a helicopter, the sound of a helicopter in the sky, and the light kind of dancing around, but then connects to me as I'm walking down the street. I didn't take off running or anything, but in my head, I'm like, well, something has happened over here in this neighborhood. Let me get on to the house.
Right.
Immediately after that thought entered my head, numerous police cars came from everywhere with demands and commands of get on the ground, get on the ground. So there I am laying on the ground being handcuffed and read my Miranda rights for, at that time, I didn't know what was going on.
Wow.
And they would put me in the police car, and I'm telling them my friend just dropped me off, and nobody was really talking to me. I ended up they took me to a Texaco service station by Bachman Lake, which was a couple of miles from where I was walking. The next thing I noticed was police cars and ambulances, and they did some stuff on my hands. I later learned that was a gunshot residue test.
Wow.
They put me in the car, and keeping in mind, I still don't know why I'm even arrested. I think that's kind of like the scariest part of
Right.
everything.
Exactly. At 19, though.
Yeah, yeah.
At 19, though, and not even knowing what's even happening and trying to process it in your mind, I know that had to be the worst feeling ever, man.
That is because you don't know why you're being picked up, because you didn't do nothing, and nobody is telling you why you're being arrested. And so I end up going downtown to Capers Building, and that's crimes against persons. The detective comes in and asks me where I had been that night. I gave him 5 phone numbers. I gave him my girlfriend's phone number, who I was over that day. I gave him Ernest's phone number. That's who drove me from Oak Cliff to North Dallas. Ernest's mom's number, because we left from her house. Carla, which was Ernest's girlfriend, and James.
Right.
I gave the detective all those phone numbers. He went out and came back, and he said, your story checked out, but we have a person that say they saw you kill one person and shoot another person, and you're going to be arraigned for murder and attempted murder.
Wow.
And so at the age of 19, I was arraigned for murder and attempted murder, a crime that I had no knowledge of, nor did I commit.
Wow. So at 19, let's readdress and kind of reclarify for the audience. So at 19, you were convicted, well, not convicted, but arraigned for murder and attempted murder based upon the allegation or storyline of one of those individuals who said they had eyewitness and spotted you at the scene of the crime.
Yes, that is correct. So the backdrop of what happened that night, it was a club, New York. Back in those days, it's where a lot of young people hung out, and it was a Texaco across the street from the New York, where people would, I guess, oftentimes go after the club was closed.
Gotcha.
At this Texaco, it was 2 young men that were sitting in a vehicle, talking to a young lady and just, kicking it after hours at the party.
Mm-hmm.
During this time, somebody ran up to the car from behind the Texaco, shot into the car. The car had T-tops on it. And so it was like a convertible top, shot into the car, killed, I believe, the driver and wounded the passenger. He runs back behind the Texaco, and a white Cadillac comes to pick him up and drives him off.
Wow,
so he leaves in a white Cadillac.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's about 11 people that see this incident happen. They're all either pumping gas or paying for gas or standing up under the Texaco awning.
Right.
When the police officers go to the scene of the crime, they get all of these witnesses that saw the shooter. Everybody is given their description. The description is 6'2", 6'4", real
Correct.
dark complected, had on a white shirt and shorts. I'm
Mm-hmm.
arrested about 30 or 40 minutes later. I'm 5'8", 5'9". I'm light skinned, had on a white shirt and pants. So physically, I shouldn't have never even been picked up. I didn't even fit the description. And when all of the witnesses went to the homicide, only one person out of the 11 picked me out of the lineup. And this
Mm-hmm.
one person was the only witness behind the Texaco when the police originally arrested me. And so it's what you call a one-on-one tainted identification procedure that was done by the police officers, be it accidentally or on purpose. You should never show a suspect to a potential witness while that person is singly in custody of the police, because it taints that person's description of the actual perpetrator that did the crime.
Right. Wow.
And so that's kind of like the scene, and that was the initial start of what turned into a long journey, not only for me, but for my family.
Wow. So, but at this time, so you now have been arraigned and you now have the eyewitness. What was it like sitting in the courtroom when you heard the judge, I guess the judgment? How did you feel at that moment in time? And what was that experience like?
We keep it in context that, when I left home, I was on my way to college. It was the summer of 94. I graduated in 93. And so I always thought that the phone call that I would make to my mom and dad would be, I'm finally getting ready to go to TSTC Waco.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm getting ready to go to plastics engineering. But here I am. I'm calling my mom and dad and telling them that I'm arrested for murder and attempted murder. And on top of that, my bond is $350,000.
Wow.
And we grew up in Oak Cliff. So
Yeah.
my dad was a disabled veteran and a minister. My mom was a school teacher, and I have three other siblings. And $350,000 was nothing that I would even fathom us paying or close to it. And so that was the first thing for me. The first biggest barrier was calling my mom and dad to tell them
Wow.
the situation that I was in. Unbeknownst to me, the first thing that my mom would tell me, she said, Richard, even though we were not there, I know that you're innocent, and we're going to
Yes.
walk this walk with you. And Dr. Love, I think that really helped me,
Yes.
because she began that journey with me. They began that journey with me, not even really being there, but knowing that I was innocent. And so we began to make this walk, and I met my court appointed attorney. We didn't have the resources to get a free world attorney. I met my court appointed attorney in Lew Sterrett County Jail. His name was Ed Gray. Ed would visit me over the next 17 months. I stayed in
Wow.
the county jail 17 months, waiting to go to jury trial. Over the 17 months, Ed Gray would tell me the evidence
Mm-hmm.
that they had in the case in general. And so the evidence was they had 10 witnesses. 9 of them said I was not the shooter.
Correct.
All of my alibis filled out statements and came to testify. The description didn't fit me. There was never a gun found. It was fingerprints at the scene of the crime that didn't fit mine, nor did they fit the people that was wounded or and fatally shot. On the other end, they had one guy that said I did the shooting, and they conducted a gunshot residue test on my hands. And so when the police picked me up and took me to the Texaco, that's what they did when they
Yeah.
took me out the car. They conducted a gunshot residue test. And during the trial, the gunshot residue analyst from Swift testified that my hands came back. The palm of my right hand tested positive for gunshot residue, but negative anywhere else. They didn't find any gunshot residue on my left hand, on my wrist, nothing else. So it was just in the palm of my right hand. And so I'm just going to put a pin in that, and I'll talk about that a little later on.
Right.
But that's what they had against me in trial. The one witness and the gunshot residue test. I had a 6-day jury trial, and on the 6th day, which was Friday, the juries heard all of the evidence. I testified. Juries heard all of the evidence, deliberated about 6 or 7 hours, and came back with a verdict of guilty. And so now I'm 20 years old, and I've been convicted, found guilty of murder and attempted murder with very flimsy evidence. I'm called back the next day, which was a Saturday. They made special court for me to give me my time. So August 27th, 1995, I was given a total of 60 years in the Texas Department of Corrections for that murder and attempted murder that happened May 15th, 1994.
Wow. So I am just kind of astonished by just kind of how the different transactions will happen, and as it relates to just the negligence of the case, and knowing that things did not align or didn't align or cooperate with everything else. And so here we find we have a situation to now where you're sitting in the courtroom being with a charge of a murder and attempted murder, and now being sitting there and being sentenced to hear a sentence of 60 years for a crime that you didn't commit.
Right.
And being at the age of 20 and looking and seeing that, wow, I'm about to go, this is over. I'm pretty sure not in the sense in your mindset that it was over, because I know you had your mom and your family that was taking this journey with you. And so what after that sentencing happened and the things kind of went forward in reading the storyline and kind of reading your stories too, is that I'm pretty sure you're going to kind of get hit to this later back when you came back to the retrial of the case.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the retrial of the case and kind of how it moved forward
Right.
in your journey process.
Right. You brought up a valid point. When I received 60 years, to me, it was over.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about my mom and dad or my family that was standing behind me, because I personally had just received 60 years. And I understood that meant 20 years that I would have to do. Now, I'm a very spiritually filled individual, and that's kind of grown as a fruit of this process. But I
Right.
felt like it was over. When they gave me 60 years, I remember sitting down and my lawyer started nudging me. He's like, man, you need to stand up and respect the court. And in my head, I'm like, how do you respect an entity that obviously does not respect you?
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, I understood that I was up under the rule and the authority of the courts. And so I had to humble myself and stand and respect the entity of the court. And so I stood and received that punishment. I would be taken to the Cofield unit a couple of months later, which is the prison unit that I did all of my time on. The
Mm-hmm.
Cofield unit is the biggest prison in Texas. It houses over 5,000 men, and it's a maximum security prison. The average person on Cofield unit is probably spending about 10 to 15 to 30 years flat on this unit.
Wow.
I get here, I'm the youngest person at that time on the unit. I'm 21 around about this time. And I went to the barber shop. They take you to the barber shop when you go first to prison to cut all your hair off. And a guy named Benjamin Spencer is the barber. And Ben is asking everybody, hey, man, where you from? Where you from? And how much time do you have? It's just a common barbershop language.
Right. Talk. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I tell Ben, I say, man, I'm from Dallas. I got 60 years for a crime that I did not commit, a murder case, and I'm telling them about it. And Ben pulls me to the side and he said, man, I've been here about 10 years. He said, I'm innocent as well. I have one of the best nonprofit organizations out of Princeton, New Jersey, working on my case. And if you're innocent, you need to write them. And so he gives me the address to Centurion. And I believe that it was ordained that I met Ben so early in my time, because I felt like I was the only person that had ever been wrongfully convicted of a crime.
Wow.
But I found out that I was just one of many. So I meet Ben. I wrote Centurion back in 1997. I got to Cofield in February of 97 and I wrote them. And they wrote me a very generic letter back stating that due to the overwhelming responses of actual innocence claims, it takes a minimum of 10 years before they're able to get on somebody's case. And so it was just a continual writing process between me and Centurion. But in between that time, I was urged by Benjamin Spencer to get in the law library. He said, you can't trust the court systems to do everything. Yes, you have your direct appeal, but what's going to happen when your direct appeal is denied? You don't have an attorney, so you got to be that attorney that files that writ of habeas corpus 1107 to the CCA, the Court of Criminal Appeals. And all of this jargon is so unfamiliar to me.
Right.
So I'm introduced to the law library and I meet a guy named Ricky Wyatt. Ricky Wyatt, innocent, over 30 years in prison. And he was the guy that taught me how to shepherdize cases. He taught me the basis of Strickland versus Washington and Brady versus Maryland, all of these case sightings that I needed to understand to fight my own battle if my direct appeal was denied. Needless to say, 2 years after I was on Cofield Unit, my direct appeal was denied. Ricky Wyatt helps me file my writ of habeas corpus 1107, and that's denied. And so around 2001, now all of my resources pretty much had got denied. And I'm now growing up pretty much in prison, but still corresponding with Centurion, still writing other organizations and so forth to hear my pleas of innocence. In 2007, and this is 13 years after I have been incarcerated, it's October 2007. I was on lockdown on Cofield Unit, the unit lockdown, and the mail lady came by and she asked me for my TDC number, and I gave her my number, 728716, and they rolled the door and they pushed this box into the cell. And I got off my bunk and I looked at the box and it was addressed from Centurion Ministries. I opened the box up and it was all my transcripts. My family didn't have the money to pay for my transcripts. My transcripts cost $3,000.
Right.
And so when I filed my writ of habeas corpus, we didn't have any record to substantiate my claims of actual innocence. It was just a brief that was expressing my actual innocence. And so I was denied because we didn't provide the evidence to substantiate my claims of innocence. And so getting my transcripts was important. And this was the first time that I had the opportunity to sit down and read through what had really happened to me 13 years prior.
Oh, 13 years prior, yes.
Yeah, 13 years prior. So I'm sitting in the cell, Dr. Love, and I read the transcripts. I'm taking notes over again, just as I did when I did my writ of habeas corpus 1107. I saw the police report. They sent me the police report, and I really didn't read it at first because my dad had went to the Dallas Police Department in 2004 and purchased my police records, and it wasn't nothing in there that really was usable in regards to my writ.
Right.
So something tells me to open up the police reports, and I open it up, and one of the first documents that I came across was a phone call memo from a police officer that receives a frantic call from a lady whose boyfriend has been bragging about killing one person and shooting another person in May of 1994.
Wow.
This phone call came way before my jury trial, and she gives a very detailed description of the crime that night. Who did the shooting, who he was with, what type of gun he had. And none of this was on the radio. None of this was on the TV. So for the police officer to get a phone call, and then in the memo, he connects my case to the call. He says, I have found a case 1 year ago that I feel like this is pertaining to. And the lady says, you guys have the wrong person.
So before the jury trial, you saying that this evidence was relevant. It was already there. Correct?
Right. Yes.
Your lawyer didn't have access to any of that at that time, or it wasn't presented as evidence?
So I'm going to say it wasn't presented. I don't know if the police officer did not turn it over to the prosecutor, if the prosecutor had it and didn't turn it over to my lawyer. All we know is it was in the police records before I went to jury trial. The phone call was actually made in, I think, May of 95, and I went to jury trial in August. So months before I went to jury trial, they had this, and this is exculpatory evidence.
Gotcha.
This began the key that turned the lock that would eventually open the door. But this wasn't the only piece of evidence in the police records. It was another document that was stating the men that had been in this incident had just beat up a guy and pulled a shotgun on him 2 days prior. There was no motive ever brought up about this particular case. And this would have told or showed the police officers or the prosecutor that there was another suspect. In trial, I'm the murderer. I'm the menace to society. There's no other suspects. So you had all of this evidence that was in the police records before I went to jury trial that was never turned in trial. And when Centurion Ministries saw this, they just saw all of this overwhelming Brady material.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how Centurion Ministries, accepted my case. That was the initial thing, but that's not the full scope of how I was eventually fully exonerated. That's how I walked out of prison in 2009.
Wow. So there's another step. So I guess it's trying to get everybody to understand and kind of see that you can be released from prison based upon that evidence, but then there's another process you said you have to go to be fully exonerated.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. The thing is, people are released that are innocent, but what happens is because innocence is based upon a compensation, the system now is pretty much trying to release people and not claiming them actually innocent. They can release them up under constitutional errors and they can vacate the person's sentence, but it doesn't mean that they're actually innocent. So it's a lot of technical stuff that the system itself is doing. So for me, when I was released in 2009, it was on the guise of actual innocence, but there had to be further investigations to substantiate the actual innocence claim. Okay, so just because they did not turn over the Brady material, that wasn't going to be enough for the Court of Criminal Appeals to say you're actually innocent. Mm-hmm. You have to prove that all of this evidence, had it been turned in, would have yielded a different verdict than the beginning. So it's just the beginning of a big legal kind of like battle.
Wow. So basically what I'm hearing is that you can be found basically innocent in that sense, but then fully not be exonerated. And then you have to be able then to be substantiate and or prove that, like you said, based upon these set of new evidence, that a new trial and a verdict would have rendered a different decision or a different outcome on your behalf.
Correct. You have people out right now like Gary Walker. Gary Walker is a prime example of a guy who was released and he's actually innocent. They have not did the final resolution to say he's actually innocent. They got all the evidence, but they just haven't did that yet.
Is that a ploy or a tactic to not pay or not provide the financial means? And so it's a way to get around the system, to beat the system. And so that I guess states are not, paying out X number of dollars. And yet, and I guess my thing as we look in community, which should be an uprising, is because you've taken someone's years, someone's livelihood for a number of years. And now, based upon a technicality in the law, you still want trying to pull something from them that's basically, in a sense, rightfully theirs.
Rightfully theirs. Correct. That's one of our battles now as being individuals that's been claimed actually innocent. There's a lot of people that's still in prison. Now, keep in mind, Texas is one of the only states where we lobbied and there is a compensation in the legislative package. In other states, they have to get out and they got to file a civil suit. So it's a different animal if you're getting released in another state and you file a suit versus in Texas, when we release you and we say you're actually innocent, we got to pay you.
Okay.
So it's a different beast. And so Texas understands that we led the nation in exonerations. It's not because we were so gung ho, it was that we kept all of the evidence. Other states, once the appeals were confirmed, they threw the evidence away because of the backlog.
Right.
Texas kept
Hmm.
all of the evidence, and that's why we yielded so many exonerations. Texas kind of assumed that they was going to have a lot of exonerations. So how can you free the innocent but not compensate the innocent?
Wow.
You free them up under something other than being actually innocent.
Correct. Correct. There's absolutely no way that you can definitely just sidebar that piece and then say that you're innocent, but then not compensate. And like
Right.
I said before, it's definitely difficult for someone who's now being reintegrated back into society or back into their community and then trying to reintegrate and then move forward. There's so many hurdles and
Yeah.
obstacles that that individual has to face. So giving that individual a leg up or olive branch extension out to say,
Right.
here is a start, but you
Right.
have to be able to do something. You not doing anything, or it's just kind of like another slap in the face again, you know?
Yeah.
So I fought so hard to get out of here, and I fought so hard to prove my level of innocence. And then you come back and slap me again all over again. So I know there has to be another layer of emotions that go along
Right.
with that, first and foremost, as a man. So
Right.
that goes along with that. So we definitely, and I'm glad that Texas has kept that. We've led the charge in that area. And I'm
Right.
glad there's been such a push and a massive push to ensure that that is done. And so we congratulate Texas in that and what they've done. So
Yeah.
my question to you is, though, what made you continue to fight? What was the underlying tone that made you continue to fight in this race, even though, like you said, when Ricky Wyatt and you filed that second appeal and it was
Right.
denied, and
Right.
then on October 2017, that 13 years, now you're receiving a package from Centurion with your transcripts in there and all of the other evidence. What made you continue throughout that whole journey and that process of that 13-year stint? Say,
Right.
I've got to keep moving. I cannot give up.
Yeah. Me personally, it was two factors. The first thing is I credit my spiritual underling, my foundation, and that's something that my mom and dad kind of instilled in me as a young man growing up. And on the other side of that coin, my mom and dad and my sisters and brother, they were a very constant piece of my incarceration, coming down to visit me, sending me resources. And I knew I was innocent. So I'm going to say my biggest fight was for them.
Right.
It wasn't for me because I knew I didn't do anything. I didn't want the community to think my dad and my mom raised a murderer, an attempted murderer. And so while I knew that I was going to benefit from the fight by being released, the fight was for them. When I got incarcerated, I had read the story of Joseph, but I was in a Joseph situation.
Mm,
And a lot of times we eat the food that's in front of us because it's the only thing in front of us until we understand that the food that we're eating is really substance for us.
correct. Correct.
And so I tried his word by his word. I said, God, if you're real, I'm in a Joseph situation. To your point of what pushed me, it was my spiritual belief system that was reinforced by the consistent presence of my family. And that kind of kept me going while I was incarcerated. And even when I got out, so I got out 6 months before I got out, my dad died. He had a battle with cancer. And so the last time I saw my dad was December of 2008. He was a real key piece in my case getting overturned because he went and got my police records in 2004. And one of the things that the Court of Criminal Appeals said in their opinion was, we showed due diligence by going to the police offices and trying to get the evidence. Because when my dad went, they didn't give us what I found that Centurion Ministries got. Remember the
Wow.
police records? My dad had already went to the police department.
Yes.
And I had those police records. That's why I was like, man, I'm not going to read that again. But it was a totally different set of records.
Do you want to improve your professional and personal life? If so, be sure to tune in weekly as Dr. Love shares valuable information, tips, news, and much more with you. Ensure you never miss an episode by simply subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Play, Facebook, Instagram, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you have any questions or topics you would like Dr. Love to address on a future show, please feel free to share your ideas with him on Facebook or Instagram. Now, let's get back to today's show. Thank you.
Wow.
Right.
I guess I'm just at awe that it was what your dad received.
Yes.
And then what Centurion had. It was two totally different things. And I'm trying to grapple with or kind of come to terms with it. How do we live in a society in the same department, whereas they released two different sets of information?
Right.
And why was this one set not relevant back 13 years prior, so that it could have helped out in the evidence of your case, but yet it was withheld? You know what I'm saying? It was withheld. So I know that, like I said, God takes us through many different journeys. And I know that you, like you said, you was on your Joseph journey.
Right.
And that's what you equated the storyline to. But I truly believe that the greater purpose in it all was back when you was fully exonerated. So can you speak to us about how moving forward to that total exoneration and kind of what propelled at that moment?
Yes, sir. So just step back. So I walked out of prison in 2009. The basic evidence was the phone call memo and the suspects that were not talked about that was in the police records before I went to jury trial. Boom. When I walk out of prison in 2009, Centurion Ministries connects with District Attorney Craig Watkins, which was the first African-American district attorney in Dallas. And District Attorney Craig Watkins really believed that I had been wrongfully convicted. And so what happened was the DA's office began working together with the Innocence Project from Centurion. And they went to talk to the young man that testified against me in jury trial. And this guy is a police officer in Oklahoma. And when the DA office went to talk to him, he then signs an affidavit and tells them that the prosecutor coerced him or pushed him to say that I was the person that did the shooting. He said the day of the trial, the prosecutor had my picture in his pocket, and he was telling the prosecutor, he said, man, I don't remember what the shooter looked like or anything like that. The prosecutor pointed to me from the picture, and he said, this is Richard. This is who you picked out. Keeping in mind, he picked me out because of a tainted identification procedure.
Correct, yes.
This is who you picked out. He's going to be sitting next to his attorney. When you go in the courtroom, I'm going to ask you who did the shooting. Just point to him. This gentleman puts all of this in the affidavit.
Wow.
And he says at the end of the affidavit, the only reason why I pointed out Richard was because the prosecutor told me to. So that's the witness. The gunshot residue test.
Yes.
In 1995, the lady from Swift testifies that my palm of my right hand was dirty for shooting a weapon. We didn't have the resources to hire an expert witness to refute or challenge the gunshot residue test. And so the juries just considered that as true. Fast forward, Centurion Ministries hires a gunshot residue expert. She reveals the fact that my hands were not dirty at all. At all.
Wow.
So they take this here and they show it to the lady that testified in my trial. She signs an affidavit stating that if given an opportunity, she would not testify in the same manner that she did in 1994. She said the reason why she testified in the manner that she did was probably from how the prosecutor came to her.
Right.
So the palm of my right hand was either dirty from holding the handcuff,
Mm-hmm.
or when they did the gunshot residue test outside, the swab hit the handcuff and it tainted that right hand swab.
Correct.
I'm left handed. So even if I did shoot a gun, my left
Mm-hmm.
hand, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to come back on the palm, it's going to come
Correct.
back on the top because
Correct.
gunshot residue. But all of the technicalities of the evidence, the juries really didn't digest that. They just heard somebody saying, yes, I saw him, and they heard the gunshot residue was positive. So now in 2011, the Brady material that wasn't turned in, the testimony is now yielded false. The gunshot residue was false. So there's no case, there's no evidence, and the state's whole case falls apart.
Wow.
I'm taken back to trial. The Court of Criminal Appeals remands, hands down a decision, overwhelmingly, unanimously, proving me actually innocent. My case is the first non-DNA, no confession. It's ex parte Richard Miles. Anybody that's wrongfully incarcerated with no DNA and no confession can use my case. My case is strictly Brady violation, prosecutorial misconduct, and tainted identification and faulty scientific evidence.
Wow. How does one man, ooh, sir, I'm sitting here halfway in tears. I'm sitting here just at awe of the story. But the other aspect of what I'm feeling at the same time is, the individual who they hung their case upon 14 years ago now comes back and recants the
Right.
story.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, and the other aspect of that as well too, is that he's a police officer.
Right.
So he
Yeah.
knows what he did 14 years ago.
Right.
And I think knowing that time frame from when he took the oath of office as a police officer,
Mm-hmm.
to me, something in you should have changed. You know what I'm saying? Something in you should have said, hey, I did something wrong 13 or 14 years ago, even with the
Yeah.
lady as well too. And to not say anything, but I know in your constant pursuit, you still was pursuing innocence, and that you had to
Yeah.
fully get to that level of exoneration because you knew that you were totally innocent. So
Mm-hmm.
how did you move forward in the healing process and forgiving those individuals and moving forward, knowing that they ultimately told a falsified testimony back
Right.
14 years ago, and now seeing them have their affidavit signed? How did you move forward in that healing process and moving forward and releasing it and letting that go?
The healing process was probably one of the most critical pieces that I think I had to deal with. And I dealt with it probably in a very obscure way. So while I was incarcerated, I was praying. I'm like, God, I don't understand how or why I'm in this situation. And God had me to take accountability on me leaving home too soon.
Gotcha.
And while I should have stayed at home and went on to college, and this is when I talk with kids, because a lot of times you don't know the ramifications of your choices. You don't know what's out there in the streets. And so by me leaving too early, that put me in a position to be wrongfully incarcerated. And if any time a person can identify that they touched a situation, they have to be strong enough to accept the accountability that they had something to do with the trajectory in which they ended up in. And so by
Right.
me saying, you know what, man, I should have stayed at home. I didn't have to move out. I could have went to college from home. That allowed me to look at the situation from a lens of, you know what, now what do I do? Instead
Mm-hmm.
of pointing the blame on somebody else. It's hard for a person to get out of a problem when you don't even accept any type of responsibility on your own. And so it was a very interesting way for me to see where I was at. The other thing that I had to do was I had to understand the oppressor. And so I started
Mm.
studying the prison system. I
Mm-hmm.
started studying how Texas was when, after the Civil War, we only had one prison, which had one prisoner in it. And how did we grow to the system of mass incarceration when the first African Americans that was incarcerated in Texas was all innocent, and they were all incarcerated to produce products for the Confederate Army, and how the system has just really been perpetuated to keep African Americans incarcerated based upon the 13th Amendment. So I had to understand all of that in order
Wow.
for me to really understand the place of incarceration in general.
Hmm.
And so when I was released, I then had to understand that nobody gives the people coming out of prison adequate resources to rebuild their life. It
Correct.
doesn't matter if you're innocent or it doesn't matter if you're guilty. Only
Mm-hmm.
thing you're going to get is $50, and you're going to be returned to a neighborhood that's being neglected by the entities of the city. So
Correct.
you got
Correct.
$50 and you're going back to South Dallas. You're going back to West Dallas. You really don't have a leg to stand on because you don't even have the resources to rebuild your life with, but you have all of the expectations of society. And
Correct.
so I just was walking through all of this and really trying to figure out, what can we do? What can this experience bring fruit to that others can benefit from?
And so from that, you began the Miles of Freedom.
Yes, sir. So the Miles of Freedom organization was a seed that was first initially born into me through my dad's church. I did a lot of Bible studies on Cofield Unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was always put in a position of helping people incarcerated. When my dad died, I cried on the shoulders of men incarcerated. This became my family. I was there 15 years. I knew them more than I knew my own family. And so when
Absolutely.
I left brothers incarcerated. And so one of my good friends, when he got out, he said, man, let's start building this organization. I was compensated for my wrongful incarceration in April of 2012. And I took a large portion of that money and we started Miles of Freedom. And the mission of Miles of Freedom is to provide holistic services for individuals, families, and communities impacted by incarceration. We believe that incarceration, or the field of reentry, you have to assist more than the person that's been directly impacted. You have to provide a service for the family. How can you keep the family nucleus together? That's important in reducing recidivism. That's important in keeping the families and communities intact. And what can organizations do in communities impacted by incarceration to give hope? And that's what we
Correct.
try to do at the end of the day, is provide hope when people hear about where we came from.
Absolutely. I think that's an amazing, and I really believe in just really looking at the number of different services you get that Miles of Freedom offers is truly helping ex-offenders and or people who are wrongfully convicted or the innocent to reintegrate back into society. And I think you also provide a level of employment, a
Yes,
transitional employment as well too, to help them get back and reacclimate back into society. And I won't say society again. I think it
right,
back into their neighboring community, because I think
right.
that's what it really is. Is really, like you're saying, is that they're coming back into their neighboring community. And how do I now be effective in my neighboring community after I've been gone 10 and 12 years? And I believe, like Richard had my own, because I've experienced this myself with my brother. Have my own brother had that level of something that when he was released from prison, that would allow him to go into a program and or like a Miles of Freedom transitional piece, would have aided him so much in to further him further along. Not to say that he didn't come along, but it took a minute for that to happen. And so for him, I just would have if he'd have had that, that would have been really a stepping stone in the right direction to help him move forward at an accelerated speed opposed to a 10-year time frame. Because when a person gets out of prison, their mindset is totally different.
Right.
And how do I reintegrate back with these soft skills of speaking and communicating outside of those limited four walls that I were in? And now I'm in a much larger community surrounding. And how do I maintain a new level of self in this new community that I'm in? And so I say it's new because I was away from it for so long. And so now when I get back to it, it's different. It looks different. The people are different. Mm-hmm. The rules have changed. And so now I've got to reacclimate myself to the rules and how that changed and what that looks like. And for many African-American communities, it's different because you're not coming home to a surplus of jobs. You're not coming home to a community that's embracing you've now been incarcerated. You have all these, I want to say it's the charges, but you have this against you. And so now trying to get a job, trying to find employment is not always the easiest. And so having a Miles of Freedom, just a network, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
People that you could talk to, collaborate with, build from. And that's what many of our communities need, because mass incarceration does impact the African-American, get it out now. The Black community, the Black community so much at a higher rate than any of its other counterparts and races, that we definitely need more programs that will really offer that reintegration piece back for many of our communities. So
Yes, sir.
I'm definitely a huge fan of that, man. And so with the transitional piece, how have you seen that level of success and really being able to extend an olive branch? And what has that been like for you?
Yeah, so, I think when we look at mass incarceration, when we look at the 13th Amendment, and if I was to ever, write a book, it would be somewhat centered around whatever happened to the first slaves after they was freed. They couldn't go fill out a job application. And so that's really the same thing that happens when people are released from prison. We've, as a society, placed people not only in prison, we've placed them in a mindset of slavery.
Correct.
When I was in prison, I worked for 15 years for free. My first job was working in the fields. I picked cotton. I picked sweet potatoes. It was very dehumanizing, demeaning. And they told me that I was going to work for parole. They tell people that that's your paycheck, but when you work, so much like the movie Shawshank Redemption, you never get fully paid. You don't get paid. And so we are releasing people that really don't even understand the core concepts of work.
Correct.
You work and you get compensated. Our transition to employment lawn service, as small as it is, it reinforces or introduces the concept of when you work, you get paid.
Right.
And that's something that a large part of our community has not been able to be a part of.
Correct.
And very, very small. It's a very light introduction. You come to work on time. You work in these particular areas. You're going to get compensated. And then based upon your participation in the lawn service, we can find you permanent employment, because now you understand the core ethics of just work itself. Set aside the soft skills, because that's a whole different story. How do you communicate with women when in prison? You better not talk to a woman that's a case. You better not look at her. So everything that we see in movies talking about slavery is perpetuated in prison. And we as a society got to say that you're telling the truth. Now, how do you release a person from slavery, not just from prison? And so you got to have pieces in the society that Miles of Freedom or that other organizations can fill the gap, because we understand the missing elements of it. And so that's kind of like what we do from the transition to employment, even outside of the camaraderie that we build, because we've all come from the same space or place.
Wow. Man, your story is amazing. What God is doing in South Dallas is amazing. It resonates with many people in many different communities, just not the African-American community, but all communities.
Yes, sir.
And this show is titled Reclaiming Victory.
Right.
And so you got to reclaim the victory, you know what I'm saying,
yes,
in the midst of it all. And so now that you've been exonerated, you have miles of freedom, and here we are today, and you were just recently awarded the CNN Heroes Award. How was that experience?
It was intense. I never thought, I oftentimes say at the age of 19, all I had was 60 years in the bunk. And so everything that I have right now, I know is because of the grace of God. And one of my board members, Trisha Bridges, she's been in nonprofits over 40 years and she's met numerous of people. But she felt that our story was that impactful that she sent in a letter to CNN Heroes. And they accepted the letter and flew me up to New York. And things will happen in your life to show you you're in the right place. I had never
Right.
met Miss Alfred Woodard a day in my life. We didn't know
Yes.
what colors we were wearing or anything like that.
Yes.
Man, when this lady walked out and she had on the same color blue that I had
Yes.
on, God was like, God, like, you in the right place. You just going
Yes.
to give it to her.
Yes. Yes, man. It was
And
amazing to
so,
see.
thank you, thank you. I'm still kind of like in awe because I was just watching some show the other day and my little brother was like, that's how everybody was with you. They was watching you.
Man,
So
it
it's
was
intense.
it was amazing, man, to watch it, to hear the storyline, and to God to put you in front of a national platform and a stage like that was amazing. And I know that God is truly being at work in your life and through your life, and He's the one truly that sustained you and kept you throughout this entire process into where you are today. And He's still carrying you today into the work that you're doing right now. And so, on behalf of every community, man, we salute you
Thank you.
because of your work. We salute you because of your fortitude to fight for your innocence. We salute you, my brother, for running the race, man, and sticking to it, man, and what you're doing in South Dallas. And so you do realize I'm right here in the Dallas area with you. So I'm going to come down, man, and see you and shake
Right.
your hand personally
Yes,
because
sir.
I'm right here in the DFW Metroplex. And so, man, I'm in awe. Man, I thank you for this time of doing this interview with you, man. It's been amazing just to hear the story once again. And so, to the Dr. Love Show audience, man, if you don't get anything else in here, that God has redemption on your behalf and that He will pull you through and move you through any situation that you may encounter and or face.
God bless you too. Thank you for this